Thank you, students. Once again, I am now about to record exercise 3.2, which is mainly focusing on the usage of the function or the button called beginning or BGN in your financial calculator. And that button is written BGN, and you find it under the button or in the same button future value. Now let me then begin and read through this, a very short question, and also based on conversion that we dealt to the conversion under compound interest. It says the information below refers to question F and G. It's not necessarily F and G, it's A and B, but rather due to the continuation of my numbering. Now it tends to be F and G. But in your handout, it is A and B. It says to finance her studies, a student borrowed 12,000 at the beginning of each year. Take note, the amounts are borrowed at the beginning of each year for the next 3 years, and interest was charged at 8.5% per annum compounded monthly, meaning every month there was interest that was accumulated to this loan. And we are required first to compute the equivalent annual rate of interest that must be corrected to 5 decimal places. And the second requirement is to compute the amount that the student owes at the end of year 5. But please note the fact that the student borrowed 12,000 for 3 years. So in the 4th year, there was no money that was borrowed, and in the 5th year, there was no money that was borrowed. But I'll explain all of that. Let us begin with number F, where we first calculate the equivalent annual rate of interest, which we know the formula for calculating the equivalent annual rate of interest says 1 plus j over 1 to the power 1, because annual is once in a year, equals, we are converting it from the equivalent rate, which is 8.5% compounded monthly. So that will be 1 plus 0.085 divide by 12, because there are 12 compounds in a year. 0.085 divide by 12 to the power of 12. Then what we do first, you know that we first have to eliminate the power on the left hand side, but in this case it's 1, so we don't have to worry. So it will be 1 plus j over 1, which is equal to, then after we deal with what is over the equal sign, make sure that you open brackets. You say 1 plus 0.085 divide by 12, close brackets, second function dip or c, then to the power of 12. That will give you 1.088390906. Then we take the 1 over the equal sign, it becomes minus, then we say minus 1, then after we minus 1 we have to multiply by 100 so that we get to the interest. Then our j, then we say minus 1 times by 100. Our annual rate of interest is 8.83909%. They said we must take it to 5 decimal places. So now this will be our annual equivalent, meaning this annual equivalent is equivalent to 8.5% per annum when it's compounded on a monthly basis. So this is per annum. So we have responded to the first requirement, of which the conversion of the rate to an equivalent rate is not an issue. Now that we are done with that, then we go to the very important part, number B, which is G currently, where now we need to calculate the amount that the student owes at the end of year 5, taking into account the fact that the payments were made, or the borrowing of money was made at the beginning of each year. And I want to draw a very different line today for more clarity on when to use the BGN and when not to use the BGN. Now we start from year. Let us say a year is in this form. This will be year 1. This is the beginning of the year, and this will be the end of the year. So at the start it is January, at the end it is December, or let me say January and December, so that we are very clear. So this is January, this is December. This is year 1. Then after we go to year 2, and year 2 again will be the same thing. At the end of December there will be January. Then after we'll have another December here. Then we have year 3. I know it's kind of difficult to draw the opening and the closing balance. This is another December. Then this is year 3. Now this is the end of year 3. Remember, year 3 begins there almost at the end of the previous December. Year 3 begins there, and year 2 begins somewhere there just after the end of December of the previous year. Then let us continue with a different color. We go to year 4, which is December of year 4, and we go to the last year, which is the 5th year, and December of the 5th year. And again highlighting there, just at the end of every December there is the beginning of January of the following year. Now the student borrowed 12,000 at the beginning of every year, meaning beginning of the first year, and somewhere there close there was another 12,000 that was borrowed, which is beginning of year 2, and somewhere there was another borrowing of 12,000, which is beginning of year 3. And we know that the end of year 3 will end somewhere there at the end, just in fact there the end of December. That will be the end of year 3 there in December, and year 2 will end there in December, and year 1 will end there in December. So I want to make this clarity very well. Now the requirement is to compute the amount that the student owes at the end of year 5. So now if we want to do that, knowing that the payments were made at the beginning of the year, now we will be doing or calculating an annuity due. This will be annuity due. And when we have annuity due, we will have in this case to use BGN, the BGN function. Now the reason why we are going to use BGN is because we have to look for the future value. We have to look for the future value at the end of year 3, not at the beginning of year 3. Remember, 12,000 was borrowed in January, and another 12,000 was borrowed in January of year 2, and another 12,000 was borrowed in January of year 3. But we are looking for the future value at the end of year 3, not at the beginning of year 3. Then because we are looking for the future value at the end of year 3, therefore now the button called BGN will have to be used. Then now they said the amount obviously will be left in the account accumulating interest for year 4 and for the full year 5. So now we first need to say we are looking for the future value at the end of the term, meaning at the end of the year, not at the beginning of the year when the amount was borrowed, but at the end of that term. So now that is why we are, and remember again, when you say BGN in your calculator, you are calculating the future value at the end of the term, not at the date the amount was borrowed, which is the last date being the beginning of year 3. So now BGN is instructing us to calculate the future value at this end of the term, not just after the borrowing of the amount at the beginning of year 3. So now we have to say plus minus 12,000 is the amount that was borrowed, and this is PMT, which is payments that were borrowed. Then our N will be 3. Then we compute, we have our interest first. Our interest that we have calculated, it is 8.3. We calculated that interest, it was 8.3909, 8.83909. So now that will be our interest, 8.3909%, and it is compounded annually. Then we divide by 1, which is 1 year in a year. Then after our n is already 3, what are we looking for? We are looking for the future value. Now please make sure that you don't forget to use the BGN button. I want to put it very clearly. BGN is giving us the future value at the end of the term, after the last borrowing of the amount, not at the end of a year, or not at the beginning of year 3. Now if we don't put BGN, we are going to get the future value after the beginning of year 3, meaning after there was a borrowing of 12,000 at the beginning of year 3. So now that will be the future value without taking into account BGN. But when we put BGN, we are getting the future value at the end of the term, meaning a year after the 12,000 was borrowed. So let us go there and say second function alpha 00. Don't forget to say second function future value, so that in the screen of your calculator you see saying in the screen BGN. Then after we say plus minus 12,000 is the PMT, payments, which in this case were the borrowing of the money. But remember, PMT is when the series of the same amounts are being paid or being received. So that will be PMT. Then we have n being 3, then 3 is our n. Then after we have 8.3909 as our interest, which is our I. Remember, this interest is compounded annually. So now we calculate the future value. We compute the future value. Just verify the interest, 8.83909, 8.83909, 8.83909. Just saying that is not okay. 8.83909 is our interest. Then we compute the future value. Now the future value, it is 40 something, just to verify that once again. Plus minus 12,000 is our PMT. We have 3 as our N. We have 8.83909 as our interest, and we are calculating the future value. Future value that we get, it is 42,747. Just wanted to verify that we have 42,747 rand 45 cents. So now this is the future value at the end of the term, not at the date when the last amount was borrowed or was paid. So we have that future value, and remember, the requirement is to calculate the future value at the end of year 5. So now what we have is the future value at the end of year 3. So now we still have 2 years to come. Year 4, which is the full year 4, and year 5, which is the full year 5. So we still have to accumulate this amount for the next 2 years. That means this future value becomes now again the present value. So now if it becomes the present value, that means we have to say now plus minus 42,747 rand 45 cents is the present value. Then I will be calculating the new future value. Then our interest per annum, it is the 8.83909. Our N obviously will be the number of years, which is 2 years, obviously year 4 and year 5. Then if you want, you can say 5 minus 3 obviously will give you 2 years. Then after we say compute future value. Remember now, in this case, the BGN function is no longer in existence because we are no longer making payments at the beginning of the year, but we are accumulating the previous future value to the next future value at the end of the given period. Then after we say now a second function, future value, to eliminate that BGN that was on the screen of your calculator. Then we say plus minus 42,747.45 is the present value. 2 is our N. 8.83909 is our interest. Compute future value. Now our future value is an amount of 50,638 rands 40 cents. So now this is the amount that will be owing at the end of year 5. Then if we want to calculate the interest for the entire 5 years, then we can also do so, but not in this case because it's not required, but you can still calculate the interest that will be accumulated, which is 12,000 times by 3. Then you minus the 50,638.40 to get to the interest that was accumulated over this period of the loan. And now I want to stress again the usage of the BGN. It is very important to highlight this. The reason why I'm highlighting is because there's normally a confusion when it comes to sometimes how we teach this as colleagues or lecturers, and it does not easily go through the minds of students. 12,000 is borrowed in January in year 1, and 12,000 is borrowed in January year 2, and 12,000 is borrowed in January of year 3. Now, if we're calculating the future value and we don't put BGN, that means we don't put this BGN button, and we say 12,000 is PMT, 3 is N, we write the interest, then we say compute future value. We don't put BGN. What do we get? We get the future value, but that future value will be at the beginning of year 3, meaning just after the last amount was borrowed. So now if we don't put BGN, we are going to get future value at this point in time. But the minute you say BGN, you get the future value at the end of the term, which is after the payment or the borrowing of the amount was done. That means we get the future value at the end of the term, which is a period after, which in this case end of year 3. So now the minute we do that, then after we accumulate this future value for the next 2 years, then that will be the future value after 5 years. And once again, if we're required to calculate the future value, let us say that it was not year 5, it was we're only given we were required to calculate the future value at the end of the term. If they say calculate the future value at the end of the term, that means it is the future value at this point where now BGN must be used if it's at the end of the term. But if you are instructed to calculate future value at the beginning of year 3, so now what does that mean? That means we don't put the BGN function. So now that will give us the future value at the beginning of year 3, not at the end of the term, which is the end of year 3. So now I think I made myself very clear when it comes to that explanation. Thank you guys with that very much. The next question is very important that I'll be recording, which is exercise 3.3. The first question on 3.3, very quite important because the first payment is made at the beginning, but all other payments are made at the end of the period, and that is very important to note. How do you account for that? Thank you.